I stood in the doorway of the house he left me, wind howling through shattered windows, floorboards groaning under my weight like they resented the return. The wallpaper peeled in tired curls, the air thick with rot and dust. They called it a gift. A final insult wrapped in splinters and mold. But as I stepped inside, past the sagging beams and empty hearth, I saw the crates. Sealed, marked, hidden. My husband hadn't just abandoned this place. He buried something in it. And whatever it was, it hadn't finished breathing. Wait. Before we go any further, I gotta ask. Where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. Snow was still falling when they lowered Richard into the ground. Thick, white flakes, soft as ash, swallowing the sound of the priest's voice. I stood there in my black coat, hands clenched inside the pockets, watching the casket disappear beneath a sheet of frost. Everyone else clustered together, Grace with her fur collar pulled tight, Luke with his arm around Maya like a politician posing for a headline. I stood a few feet apart, the way I had for most of my marriage. Richard had a talent for gathering people who owed him and for isolating the one who loved him. Even in death, he managed both. When the final prayer ended, Grace dabbed her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief and leaned toward me. He left you that ruin out west? Fitting, I suppose. Her voice was silk hiding a blade. I smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach your eyes. We all get what we deserve. Luke stepped forward, snow dusting the shoulders of his designer coat. You can have the dust, Mom. The real estate's mine. His grin was pure Mercer, entitlement dressed as charm. Maya squeezed his arm, her diamond ring catching the weak light. She didn't speak, but her eyes said everything. You're finished. The funeral crowd began to thin, engines starting in the distance. I stayed, waiting for the lawyer to approach. Mr. Davis, nervous, thin, more paper than man, cleared his throat. Mrs. Mercer, before the family disperses? The will. Grace turned instantly. Can't this wait until after the reception? He shook his head, fumbling with his folder. Richard was explicit, immediate reading. He adjusted his glasses, voice quivering as he read the list of bequests. Grace received control of the family trust. Luke inherited the company's shares. Maya, a trust fund for the preservation of lifestyle. Each word carved away what little illusion I had left about my marriage. Then came the pause. Davis squinted at the next line. Property on Hollow Ridge to Eleanor Mercer. Silence, sharp and cold as the wind. Luke barked a laugh. That shack? He hated that place. Grace's mouth twisted. It's practically condemned. I felt everyone's eyes turn toward me, waiting for humiliation to sink in. I gave them none. Then you won't miss it, I said, and took the folder from the lawyer's trembling hands. Maya stepped closer, her perfume too sweet against the bite of snow. You don't have to keep it, Eleanor. We could relieve you of the burden. I met her gaze. You relieve yourselves just fine. She blinked, momentarily off balance. Grace recovered first. Come, Luke. Let her have her moment. She guided them toward their waiting SUV, the family emblem glinting on the license plate. I watched the tires crush fresh snow into mud as they pulled away. When they were gone, the cemetery was suddenly quiet, only the wind moving through the pines. I knelt beside the grave, brushing snow from the temporary marker. Richard Mercer, beloved husband and father. The lie looked tidy in stone. You couldn't even give me honesty in death, I whispered. The words steamed in the air before vanishing. Footsteps crunched behind me. Caleb Reed, older now, his hat in his hands. Didn't expect to see you back here, Eleanor. Neither did I I said. He hesitated, as if wanting to reach out, but I wasn't ready for kindness. Not yet. They're saying you got Hollow Ridge, he said carefully. I did. He gave a low whistle. That place is barely standing. So am I answered. But I'm still standing. His eyes softened, but he didn't argue. If you need help, you know where to find me. He tipped his hat and walked away, leaving a single trail of footprints that the wind quickly erased. I looked back at the grave one last time. The snow had already begun to cover the fresh soil, smoothing out every trace of the ceremony, as if the earth couldn't wait to forget him. I pulled my gloves tighter, the folder clutched under my arm. The cold bit at my cheeks, but inside, something fierce stirred. A quiet, steady warmth rising through the frost. They think they buried you, I murmured, turning toward the road. But maybe they just unearthed me. And as I walked to my car, the first shiver of an idea, sharp, dangerous, undeniable, took root in my chest. The drive to Hollow Ridge took most of the afternoon. Montana stretched endless around me, miles of pale grass rippling under a sky that couldn't decide between gray and blue. The radio was off. I wanted silence, the kind that lets you hear your own pulse and the creak of thoughts you've tried to bury. Richard and I had driven this same road once, years ago. He'd laughed then, pointing at the mountains like a king showing off his domain. One day, it'll all be worth something, he had said. I remember thinking he meant us. Turns out, he meant the land. The wind picked up as the road narrowed into gravel, slicing across the plain. Hollow Ridge appeared like a memory you'd rather forget. Tilted roof, sagging porch, and the distant shape of the old barn leaning like it had been caught mid-breath and never exhaled. The gate was gone. The paint had peeled to bone. I killed the engine and just sat there for a moment, letting the cold seep in. My breath fogged against the windshield. So this is what you left me, I whispered. The front steps groaned when I set foot on them. The door resisted before it gave, hinges shrieking in protest. Inside smelled of wet wood and dust, years of neglect pressed into the air. Light from the broken windows cut through the gloom in sharp, uneven stripes. Graffiti sprawled across the wall near the entryway. Keep out. A raccoon darted from a torn sofa and vanished into the kitchen. The sound startled a laugh out of me, dry, bitter, the kind that comes from a place deeper than humor. Your final insult, I said to no one, a house as faithful as its master. The floors bowed under my weight. I wandered through what used to be a living room, framed photos long gone, wallpaper slouched in strips. Water stains mark the ceiling like bruises. The fireplace, once our brief experiment in romance, was stuffed with old newspaper and ashes. Yet somewhere beneath the rot, I could still feel the bones of what it once was. Wide beams, good timber, hand-cut floors. Richard had always bragged about quality wood. I knelt by the hearth, tracing a plank with my fingers, and found a pattern of faint initials burned into the grain. R.M. The letters sent a tremor through me. He'd left his mark everywhere. I turned toward the back room, a faint glint catching my eye under the broken window. Against the far wall, 3 crates sat stacked, their lids sealed tight and edges stamped with faded lettering. Mercer Timber Co. I brushed away the dust. Coughing as it rose like smoke, the markings were clear enough to read even after all these years. He hadn't just abandoned this place, he'd stored something here, something he never meant for anyone to find. My hands trembled as I pried at one of the lids, but it wouldn't budge. The metal nails were rusted solid. Whatever was inside, it had been kept deliberately, protected. Footsteps crunched on the porch behind me. I froze, the sound too deliberate to be an animal. Eleanor? I turned, half startled, half relieved. Caleb stood framed in the doorway, snow dusting his jacket, breath clouding the cold air. "You shouldn't be here alone," he said softly. I straightened, wiping my hands on my coat. "I've been alone for years." His eyes met mine, steady, familiar, the kind that used to make me forget how lonely I was. "Place like this," he said, stepping inside, "can make a person remember too much." I glanced back at the crates. "Or not enough." He followed my gaze. "Those from the old company?" "Looks that way." He crouched beside one, running his hand over the label. "If these are what I think they are, Eleanor, you might be sitting on something worth more than memories." The wind howled through a broken window pane, scattering papers across the floor like startled birds. I watched them swirl and settle at my feet. Ledgers, receipts, fragments of a life built on profit and pride. Outside, the sky darkened into the bruised blue of evening. I could feel the house breathing around us, groaning, settling, remembering. I tightened my grip on the crate edge, the wood rough under my fingers. "Then let's see what my husband thought was worth hiding." Caleb hesitated, studying me. "Are you sure you want to open what he left behind?" I looked him dead in the eye. "He left me everything that mattered broken. Maybe it's time I see what's still standing." The wind rattled the walls, a long, low moan that sounded almost like approval. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving a thin crust of frost across the fields. The house looked less like a ruin in daylight, still broken, but with a kind of dignity in the wreckage. Caleb had come back before sunrise, toolbox in hand, as if he'd never left. He didn't knock this time, just called through the open doorway. "You awake?" "Barely." My breath hung in the air, the cold settling in my bones faster than the coffee in my thermos could chase it off. He stepped inside, stamping snow from his boots. "You'll freeze to death if you don't seal up those windows." "I'd rather see the view," I said. He gave me a look that was half amusement, half concern, then set down his tools. "Mind if I start anyway?" I shrugged. "If you're offering." For the next few hours, we worked side by side in a rhythm that felt older than both of us. Him measuring, me sweeping, boards creaking under our combined weight. The house seemed to watch, shifting and sighing as if approving the attention. At one point, I caught him studying the beams overhead, his brow furrowed. "You ever notice the framing in this place?" "I notice it's barely holding." "Yeah, but look closer. That's Mercer timber quality, back when the company still meant something. This wood's worth more than most people think." His tone held something deeper than nostalgia. I followed his gaze to the rafters, where old brand marks were still visible, faint but legible. "You sound like a man who knows," I said. "I worked here one summer," he replied, running a gloved hand along a post. "Your husband built this place on more than charm. He built it on ownership. Land, lumber, rights. It was all about who signed the paper first." Something in the way he said it made me pause. "Rights?" He nodded slowly. "There's talk around town. Richard never filed transfer deeds for the Hollow Ridge timber lot. If that's true, the lumber rights still belong to the property." I stared at him, the weight of his words sinking in. "And the property belongs to me." Caleb met my eyes, careful, searching. "If those rights are still tied to this land, Eleanor, you're sitting on a gold mine." The silence that followed wasn't quiet. It pulsed, heavy with all the things I hadn't allowed myself to want. I turned toward the window, watching the light shift across the hills. Snow glittered like 1,000 small chances. Luke doesn't know, I murmured. None of them do. Not yet, he said. I could hear the unspoken warning in his tone. This wasn't just old gossip. It was ammunition. Dangerous if handled wrong. I crossed the room and stood in front of him. Tell me what you'd do, if it were yours. He hesitated, eyes narrowing slightly. I'd be careful who I told. That's not what I asked. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. I'd dig. Quietly. Get proof before anyone knows you're even looking. Something in me flickered alive, the same heat that had burned the day I buried Richard. Would you help me find out? His jaw tightened, and for a long moment he didn't answer. The air between us felt charged, like static before lightning. If you're ready for what it means, he finally said. I didn't look away. I've been ready since the funeral. He nodded once, slow, the corner of his mouth twitching like he almost smiled. Then I'll bring what we need tomorrow. We stood there, surrounded by dust and silence, the morning light crawling across the floorboards between us. For the first time since Richard's death, I felt the faint hum of something alive, not grief, not rage, but purpose. Caleb turned to leave, pausing at the doorway. You know, this place might just have some life left in it after all. I watched him walk down the steps, his figure small against the sweep of the land. When he reached his truck, he looked back once. I didn't wave. I couldn't. Instead, I looked around the ruined room, the cracked walls, the sealed crates, the initials burned into wood, and felt a slow burn rise in my chest. He'd built this house to control me. Now it might be the very thing that frees me. Outside, the sun caught the snow just right, and for a moment, it looked like the whole valley was on fire. The next morning, the house felt different. Less like a ruin, and more like a challenge. Caleb arrived with coffee and a pry bar, both of which I needed. The wind had died, leaving the world too still, like the land itself was waiting for what we'd find. We started in the study, if you could still call it that. The air was thick with dust and mouse droppings, and the faint scent of old tobacco clung to the walls. Richard had spent hours in this room. His empire had started here. Ledger by ledger, lie by lie. Caleb pried open the warped drawers of a rusted metal desk while I sorted through piles of crumbling paper. Every scrape of metal echoed through the empty house. I found tax records, company letters, a few faded photographs, nothing that mattered. Then, as he shifted the desk to reach a jammed drawer, I heard it. A hollow clunk. Wait, I said. Do that again. He lifted the desk slightly and dropped it. Another dull thud from beneath the bottom drawer. Caleb crouched, shining his flashlight under the frame. There's a false panel. My pulse quickened. Can you get it open? He wedged the pry bar under the metal and leaned into it. The panel snapped with a sharp crack, and a small wooden box slid out, coated in grime and rusted at the hinges. Looks like you found his secrets, he murmured. I knelt, brushing years of dust away. The lid was locked, but the wood was so brittle I barely had to try. It splintered under my hands, and inside lay a stack of yellowed documents bound with a rotting ribbon. A marriage certificate, ours, signed and dated with the same precision Richard used on contracts. Beneath it, property bonds, old share certificates, and at the very bottom, a sealed envelope marked in his handwriting, last will and testament. The air seemed to thicken around me. Caleb's voice was distant. Eleanor? I tore it open, the paper crumbling slightly at the edges. My name filled the first line. I, Richard Mercer, being of sound mind. The words blurred as I read, my breath catching halfway through. He hadn't left me a ruin. He'd left me everything. The Montana estate, the associated assets, the rights to the Mercer Timber holdings. Everything. My hands shook as I turned the pages. At the bottom was his signature, dated 2 years after the official will Grace and Luke had flaunted at the funeral. This one was newer. Final. Caleb leaned over my shoulder. This changes everything. No, I said quietly. It explains everything. I could see it now. The smug smiles at the graveside, Grace's certainty, Luke's arrogance. They hadn't been surprised by what I inherited. They'd known exactly what they were hiding. Grace had controlled the family trust for decades. If this will had surfaced, she'd lose her power overnight. Luke would lose his claim to the company. They'd played me perfectly. The grieving widow too blind to notice the knife in her back. My vision tunneled, blood roaring in my ears. Rage wasn't even the right word for it. It was something colder, purer, a kind of clarity that burned from the inside out. Caleb touched my shoulder, voice low. Eleanor, listen to me. If Grace or Luke find out you've got this, they'll come for it. They'd kill for this kind of money. I turned to him slowly, still clutching the papers. Then let's give them a reason to. He blinked. You can't mean... Oh, I mean every word. I slid the will back into its envelope, folding it carefully, almost tenderly. They took my husband's lies and used them against me. It's time I return the favor. Caleb hesitated, searching my face for the woman he used to know. I wasn't her anymore. I could see it in his eyes, the flicker of recognition and unease. Be careful, Eleanor, he said softly. You're stepping into their game now. I met his gaze, my voice steady. No, Caleb. I'm rewriting the rules. The wind rose suddenly outside, rattling the boards like applause. I closed the lid on the broken desk, slid the false panel back into place, and dusted my hands clean. Whatever came next, I wasn't the widow they thought they'd buried. By the next morning, my fury had settled into something far more dangerous, calm. Rage burns fast, but strategy simmers. I spent hours sitting at the kitchen table. The second will spread open like a wound. Every word was a revelation, every clause another nail in Grace's coffin. But before I used it, I needed to see her face when I laid the bait. Grace Mercer didn't live modestly. Her home on the edge of Bozeman was the kind of place people built when they wanted to be envied, a modern fortress of glass and stone, perched above the valley like she owned the view. I parked halfway down the drive, walking the rest of the way through the cold. My boots crunched over gravel. I could see her silhouette through the wide windows, standing at her bar, pouring something amber into a cut glass tumbler. When she opened the door, her expression barely shifted. Eleanor, she said, smooth and dismissive all at once. To what do I owe this surprise? I thought it was time we talked, I replied. Family to family. Grace arched a brow but stepped aside, motioning toward the living room. Everything gleamed. Polished wood, curated art, an entire wall of Mercer history framed in gold. She liked her trophies close. Drink, she asked. Not this early. She smirked. It's never too early when you've buried a husband. I ignored the jab and took a seat, my hands folded neatly in my lap. I've been going through some of Richard's papers, I said, voice measured. He was thorough. Her eyes flicked just for a second. Thorough. Yes, that was his curse. The man never did anything halfway. I found records from the Montana estate. I continued, watching her. Odd, considering how much he supposedly hated that property. Grace's smile tightened. Some things aren't meant to be dug up, dear. That was when I knew. She'd just told me she knew about the search, about the desk, the documents, maybe even the will. But I pressed on, playing the part of the naive widow. I suppose not, I said softly. Still, it's strange. There were papers there, deeds, bonds, even. I paused, as if searching for the word. Something that looked like a draft of a will. Grace's glass stopped midair. For half a heartbeat, her mask cracked. Then she set the drink down with a careful clink. He promised me half the company if I destroyed it, she said, almost absently. The words hit like ice water. Excuse me? Her gaze met mine, calm and certain. He wanted to protect Luke, of course. The boy would have squandered everything otherwise. But you? She tilted her head. You were never built for this family, Eleanor. Richard knew it. He said it himself. I sat perfectly still, though my pulse roared in my ears. And yet he married me. Because it looked good. Grace's voice turned colder. You made him human when he needed to seem that way, but he never intended you to keep any of it. The room tilted slightly. My fingers dug into my palms to keep from shaking. So that was the truth. Richard hadn't just betrayed me by omission. He'd bargained my worth away like a business deal. I stood slowly. Thank you for your honesty, Grace. It's refreshing to finally hear it spoken aloud. Her lips curved in a patronizing smile. You always did have a talent for dramatics. Maybe that's what it takes, I said, stepping toward the door, to survive your kind of family. Outside, the cold hit like a slap. I didn't breathe until I reached the car. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, not from fear, but from the sharp clarity of realization. Richard, Grace, Luke, they'd all fed from the same trough of greed. They'd built a dynasty of deceit, and I'd been its fool. I laughed once, bitter and short, then whispered to myself, you all deserve each other. That night, back at Hollow Ridge, I built a fire in the old hearth. The logs caught quickly, flames clawing their way up the chimney. I slipped my wedding ring from my finger, the gold dull, scratched from years of pretending. For a moment, I stared at it in my palm, the symbol of everything I'd lost, everything I'd mistaken for love. Then I tossed it into the fire. The metal hissed as it met the flames, glowing briefly before collapsing into the ash. I watched it until the last shimmer disappeared, until the smoke curled upward like a sigh. Enough, I said softly to no one but the shadows. I've mourned long enough. The firelight reflected off the window, turning my face into something unrecognizable, harder, clearer, alive. This time, I whispered, the words a vow, I build my own empire. And outside, the wind rose again, carrying the promise into the dark. By the time the ashes cooled in the hearth, I already knew what had to be done. Grief had given way to something sharper, a purpose that kept me awake through the night. The next morning, I stood on the porch with a mug of black coffee, watching the fog rise off the hills. Hollow Ridge looked less like a grave now, and more like an opportunity. Caleb arrived at dawn, tools rattling in the back of his truck. He caught the look in my eyes before I said a word. You didn't sleep, he said. Sleep's for people who still dream, I replied. He chuckled softly, then gestured toward the collapsed barn. Figured we'd start with the part that might actually stay upright. For 2 weeks, we worked in silence and sawdust. The house began to take shape again. one careful repair at a time. Caleb replaced the porch beams. I stripped years of grime from the windows until the light came through clean and bright. The more I built, the less of Richard I felt under my skin. I handled the legal work in the evenings, stacks of papers spread across the kitchen table like a battle map. Quiet transfers, small land sales, enough movement through local banks to raise eyebrows only after it was too late. Each signature felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. Caleb noticed, of course. "You're up to something," he said one night as we packed away tools. "Up to surviving," I said. "And maybe winning for once." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Just don't let winning look too much like revenge. People around here talk." "Good," I said. "Let them." The snow had melted to mud by the time Luke showed up. His shiny SUV didn't belong on the gravel road, and he made sure I knew it. I heard the engine before I saw it, that aggressive hum that meant he wanted to be noticed. He stepped out wearing a coat worth more than most people's trucks. Maya followed behind, every move measured. She looked around the property with that socialite's curiosity, half disgust, half appraisal. "Mom," Luke said, his voice dripping false charm. "Didn't think you'd still be here." "I didn't think you'd ever come," I answered. He glanced at the repaired porch, the new windows, the faint smoke from the chimney. "You're squatting on family land," he said flatly. "We've got buyers lined up for the surrounding lots." I smiled, small, deliberate. "Funny, my name's still on the title." His jaw tightened. "That's temporary." "Everything is," I said. Maya placed a hand on his arm, a subtle act of control disguised as affection. "Luke," she said smoothly, "maybe we should all be reasonable. Your mother's clearly renovating. Perhaps she'd consider selling for the right price." "I'm not selling," I said. "Not now. Not ever." Luke took a step closer, eyes hard. "You can't keep this place afloat. You'll drown in taxes before the paint dries." "Then I'll learn to swim," I said, holding his stare. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the creak of the windmill turning slow above us. Then Luke laughed, sharp and joyless. "You've always been stubborn. It's why Dad couldn't trust you with the business." "Your father trusted plenty of people," I said quietly. "And look how that turned out." He looked as if he wanted to strike back, but Maya's hand tightened around his wrist. "Come on," she murmured. "She's bluffing. If she's not, we'll buy her out before she knows what hit her." They turned and walked toward the SUV, boots sinking in the thawing mud. As the engine roared to life, Maya glanced back once through the tinted window. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. When the sound faded down the road, Caleb stepped out from behind the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. "You handled that well." I watched the horizon where the dust still lingered from their tires. "They're rattled," I said. "That's better than winning." He raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "Because scared people make mistakes," I said. Caleb studied me for a long beat, then gave a slow, almost reluctant smile. "You've changed." "No," I said, looking toward the house glowing in the late light. "I just stopped pretending I hadn't." The wind picked up again, carrying the scent of sawdust and something electric, the smell of beginnings. I turned to him, my voice low but steady. "They're already scared," I whispered. "Perfect." By spring, Hollow Ridge no longer looked like a ruin. The walls stood straight again, the porch gleamed with new paint, and the scent of sawdust had been replaced by fresh pine and oil. What had once been a broken inheritance was now a living thing, breathing, working, earning. Mercer Timber rose again quietly without announcement or ceremony. No press releases, no glossy logos. Just a handful of workers who'd lost their jobs when the company folded, and a widow who knew exactly what her family had thrown away. Caleb handled the logistics. I handled the rest. We opened the old mill first, the one Richard had closed during his restructuring. The equipment was rusted, but the bones were still strong. Caleb's men cleaned it out, greased the gears, and by June, the hum of machinery echoed down the valley for the first time in a decade. Locals started showing up uninvited, some curious, others hopeful. They came with resumes folded into back pockets, with stories about fathers and uncles who'd once worked under the Mercer name. For the first time, the name didn't feel like a curse. I paid fair wages, no favors, no lies. The workers called me Mrs. Mercer at first, but eventually just Eleanor. I didn't correct them either way. By midsummer, the money began to trickle in. Small shipments of reclaimed lumber, private orders from local contractors. Nothing loud, nothing flashy, but steady. Caleb said it best one evening as we watched the sunset through the open mill doors. "It's funny," he said, leaning against a beam. "You're rebuilding the same empire that broke you." I smiled faintly. "Maybe, but this time it's under new management." He chuckled. "You always did have a way with control." "It's not about control," I said quietly. "It's about ownership." In early July, I drove into town and met with a lawyer I trusted, one who didn't owe favors to Grace or Luke. The paperwork was straightforward: deed transfers, corporate filings, the quiet resurrection of Mercer Timber Holdings under my name. Caleb signed on as co-owner, though I could see in his hesitation that he wasn't sure if it was partnership or protection. "You don't have to put my name on it," he said. "I do," I replied, "because they'll come for me, but they'll underestimate you." He studied me, then signed without another word. The first whispers reached Grace within a week. I knew because she called me, her voice all honey and venom. "Eleanor, darling," she purred over the phone. "I hear you've taken an interest in lumber?" "I like things that grow," I said. She laughed once, a brittle sound. "You think you can build from the ashes? That business is finished." "Maybe the old version," I said. "But I'm finding the new one works just fine." Her tone dropped. "You're playing a dangerous game." "I'm just living on my land, Grace. You remember land, don't you? That thing my husband left me." There was a pause long enough to hear her breathing tighten. Then the line went dead. I didn't hear from her again, but Luke did. He arrived 2 days later, tires crunching the gravel, rage radiating off him like heat. He didn't bother knocking this time. The door slammed open, echoing through the hall. "Are you out of your mind?" he shouted. "You're stealing our legacy." I turned slowly from the ledger I'd been reviewing. "No," I said evenly, reclaiming mine. His face twisted, the kind of fury that comes from realizing control is slipping through your hands. "You can't just take what Dad built." I met his eyes. "I didn't take it, Luke. You gave it away the moment you tried to bury me with it." He stepped closer, jaw clenched, fists balled. "You think this makes you powerful? You're alone out here." "Always have been." I stood, closing the ledger. "Alone," I said softly, but not powerless. For a moment, he didn't move. Then Maya's voice cut through the doorway, sharp, urgent. "Luke." He turned, her expression pulling him back like a leash. They left without another word. Through the window, I watched their car vanish down the long road, dust curling in its wake. Caleb appeared in the doorway behind me, wiping his hands on a rag. That sounded pleasant. I exhaled slowly, the tremor of adrenaline fading. They finally see me, I said. Now they'll try to destroy me. He frowned. And you're smiling because that's how I know I've won the first round. Outside, the saws roared back to life, drowning out the echo of my son's anger. The war had officially begun. The call came 3 days after Luke's visit. Maya's voice on the other end was syrup smooth, perfectly measured. "Eleanor," she said, "I think it's time we all calmed down. No lawyers, no threats. Just dinner, a chance to clear the air." I could almost hear the smile in her tone, the kind you wear when you think you've already won. "Dinner?" I repeated. "At the range house," she said. 8 o'clock. Just you and me. I'll even pay." The range house wasn't neutral ground. It was where the Mercers had entertained investors, signed contracts, and toasted to each other's betrayals. Still, I agreed. 8 it is. When I hung up, Caleb looked up from the truck he was tuning. "That didn't sound friendly." "It wasn't meant to," I said. He frowned. "You don't have to go." "I do," I said. "She's not inviting me to dinner. She's inviting me to surrender." The range house glowed like a lantern against the dark. Inside, everything gleamed. Polished wood, soft jazz, a room full of money pretending to be warmth. Maya sat near the back, already waiting, a glass of red wine in her hand and a smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Eleanor," she said, rising slightly, "you look resolute." "I've had practice," I said, taking the seat across from her. She gestured toward the waiter. "Wine? You could use it." "I'll pass." Her expression softened, the practiced empathy of a woman who'd learned to weaponize concern. "Luke's been upset. You've put him in a difficult position." "I've put him in his place," I corrected. Maya's smile didn't falter. "You've always underestimated him. He's stronger than you think." "And you've always overestimated your control," I said. Her eyes glittered. "You don't have to keep fighting us. You have what you wanted. The house, the company's old name, your pride. Isn't that enough?" I leaned back, folding my hands in my lap. "If you thought it was, you wouldn't be here." The waiter set down a fresh glass of wine in front of her. She didn't drink it right away. Instead, she reached into her leather bag and pulled out a slim folder. She slid it across the table, the paper whispering as it moved. "Sign these," she said softly, "and we'll make you rich quietly. You keep the house, the public sympathy, and a generous payout. Everyone wins." I stared at the folder. "And what do you win?" She tilted her head. "Peace." I laughed then quietly, the sound startling even me. "You think I want your money?" Her smile froze, the mask slipping just enough to show the steel underneath. "You'll regret this," she said. "I already do," I replied. The waiter arrived with the bill before she could answer. She didn't look at it, just threw down a black card and stood. "Enjoy your righteousness while it lasts. It doesn't pay the taxes." She turned and walked out, her perfume lingering like a warning. I stayed for a moment, staring at the untouched folder. The red wine in her glass caught the light like blood. I left it all there. The papers, the offer, the illusion. Outside, the night air was clean and sharp. Caleb's truck headlights flashed down the road. He'd insisted on waiting nearby. When I climbed in, he studied my face. "Well?" he asked. "She offered to buy me off," I said. He grunted. "Figures. How bad was it?" "She's good," I said. "Practiced." She almost made me believe she cared. Caleb drove in silence for a moment, the gravel crackling under the tires. "They won't stop at offers," he said finally. "They're planning something bigger. Grace doesn't like to lose." "I know," I said, looking out the window at the dark stretch of land ahead. "Neither do I." He glanced sideways at me. "So what now?" I turned toward him, voice steady. "Now? We let them think they're winning." The truck rumbled on, headlights cutting through fog that gathered like ghosts along the road. Behind us, the town lights shrank to pinpoints, each one another place that had once belonged to the Mercers, now blinking out one by one. "Good," I murmured, more to myself than to him. "Let them plan something bigger." Caleb frowned. "You sound almost eager." I smiled faintly. "Because I am." Outside, the horizon burned faintly with lightning in the distance, silent, waiting. "Good," I whispered. "So am I." It began on a Tuesday, the kind of cold, gray morning that feels like a warning. I was halfway through payroll when Caleb stormed into the office, his jaw set hard enough to crack teeth. He tossed a folded newspaper onto my desk. The headline screamed in bold, "Mercer widow under investigation for forged will." For a moment, the words didn't register. They couldn't. But there it was. My name printed beneath a photo taken without permission, me standing outside the mill, mid-laugh, painted as the villain. My throat went dry. They actually did it. Caleb's voice was low, furious. "Grace and Luke filed a petition yesterday. Claim says you forged Richard's second will. They've got some slick lawyer out of Denver handling it." I read the article again. Every line was poison. Fraudulent documents, manipulated estate, grieving wife turned opportunist. By the second paragraph, I was a caricature. Greedy, conniving, desperate for a fortune I'd supposedly stolen. "Jesus," Caleb muttered. "They're dragging you through the mud." I sat back slowly, the paper trembling slightly in my hands. "No," I said. "They're trying to drown me in it." By noon, the damage had spread. The bank called to temporarily suspend access to the company accounts. By dusk, 3 workers quit, just until things settled down. And by nightfall, Grace had managed to get a local reporter to park outside the property, camera ready, waiting for a quote I would never give. Caleb slammed the mill door shut that evening, his face streaked with sawdust and frustration. "They froze your assets. Without cash flow. The payroll's done by Friday." "Let it be done," I said quietly. He turned, incredulous. "That's it? You're giving up?" I met his eyes, calm despite the storm brewing around me. "You don't win wars by fighting every battle. Sometimes you let them think they've won." But truthfully, when he left that night, I sat alone in the half-lit office until the generator hummed out, and the dark swallowed the room. For the first time in months, the weight of everything pressed down. I wasn't sure I could carry it. I pulled open Richard's old ledger, flipping through yellowed pages filled with his spidery handwriting. Notes, numbers, deals. Each line was a reminder of how deeply he'd tied my life to his. And for a moment, I hated myself for ever wanting to keep the Mercer name. The knock came just before dawn. Caleb stood there, his hair wet with rain, a folder clutched tight in his hands. "You need to see this." He spread the papers out on the kitchen table, the ink faded, the signatures precise. "I found it in the county archives," he said. "It's a notarized copy of Richard's will, filed years before his death. Same clauses, same dates, same transfer of property to you. It's official, Eleanor. It's proof." I stared at it, hardly breathing. "They can't fight this." They'll try, he said. But this one's recorded with the county clerk. Grace can't erase that. The next morning, I walked into the courthouse wearing the same black coat I'd worn to Richard's funeral. A poetic choice, though I didn't plan it that way. The marble floors echoed beneath my heels as I entered the courtroom where Grace sat in the front row, her lips curved in that familiar, poisonous smirk. Her lawyer rose, all confidence and arrogance. "Your Honor, the evidence shows Mrs. Mercer falsified." I cut him off with a single motion, sliding the notarized copy onto the table. "The only falsification," I said, my voice steady, "is the one they built out of fear." The judge examined the document, frowning as he read. 10 minutes passed in silence. Then he looked up. "This," he said, "is legitimate. Filed, dated, and certified by the state." Grace's face drained of color. Luke's fists clenched on the bench behind her. The gavel struck once. All claims dismissed. Ownership restored to Mrs. Eleanor Mercer in full. The sound of the gavel echoed like thunder. I turned slightly in my seat, meeting Grace's eyes. Her composure was gone, the calm veneer cracking into something feral. For a fleeting moment, she looked exactly as she was, cornered. I stood. "You should have left me buried," I said quietly. The judge called for order, but I was already walking out. Cameras flashed in the hallway. Microphones thrust toward me. "Mrs. Mercer, do you have a statement?" I didn't break stride. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the courthouse steps slick and shining. Caleb waited at the bottom, umbrella in hand, his grin wide and disbelieving. "Well," he said. I took a slow breath, the first clean one in days. "Round 2, I whispered. The umbrella tilted slightly as he looked at me. "You really think they'll stop now?" I met his gaze. "No," I said. "I'm counting on it." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of wet pine and victory. Not final, but earned. Behind us, the courthouse doors burst open, voices rising, cameras flashing again. I didn't turn back. For the first time, I felt untouchable. Winning in court didn't end the war. It just changed the terrain. Grace had always ruled the family trust like a monarch, but once the judgment hit the financial papers, her crown began to rust. Donors withdrew, partners hesitated, and one by one, her loyal advisors started calling me instead. For weeks, I played the patient ghost, answering nothing, promising less, and listening more. Caleb called it silence with teeth. Grace, on the other hand, was flailing. She'd leveraged too much trying to bury me. Her debts had debts, and when the trust defaulted on a few quiet loans, I made my move. "Buy them," I told Caleb one night as we sat at the kitchen table. The fire cracked low between us, illuminating the old Mercer seal burned into the table's wood. He looked up from the stack of files. "Through the shell companies?" "Through whoever they'll never suspect," I said. "We'll take their empire the way they tried to take mine, on paper." He hesitated. "You're talking about bleeding your own family dry." I met his gaze. "I'm talking about balance." Within a month, half of Grace's holdings were technically owned by strangers who worked for me. Ranch land, timber contracts, and one of her last liquid accounts. All pieces on a chessboard I finally controlled. She didn't even know she'd lost yet. Luke, though, he knew something was wrong. Word spread through Bozeman that he'd been seen shouting outside a bank, red-faced, wild-eyed. His trust fund was dwindling fast, the family name losing value by the day. The next week, Maya appeared. She showed up at the mill like she'd just happened to be driving by, her coat too elegant for sawdust and her smile too polished for coincidence. "Caleb," she said sweetly, I hear you're the brains behind my mother-in-law's little comeback. He laughed under his breath. You've been misinformed. I doubt that, she replied, stepping closer. Luke's worried about her. You must see how much stress this has caused him. Caleb leaned against the truck, watching her like she was a snake learning to dance. Luke's stress isn't my concern. But it could be, she said, her voice dropping to a hush. If you were working with the right people. She left her number on his dashboard, written in red ink. That night, he handed me the note. She's fishing, he said. Want me to let her catch something? I smiled faintly. Let her think she's winning, but only feed her what I write. Over the next few weeks, Caleb played the part beautifully. Gruff, resistant, slowly tempted. Maya swallowed every word. He told her about non-existent contracts, false investors, a phantom buyer for Hollow Ridge. And through her, the gossip reached Grace and Luke. They moved money where I wanted them to move it. Then came the final push. I contacted a rival investment firm that had once competed with Mercer Timber for federal contracts, people Grace had humiliated years ago. Together, we orchestrated a buyout that looked like friendly acquisition, but wasn't. When the press release hit, the stock value of the Mercer Trust fell 40% overnight. Luke called first. His voice was hoarse, disbelieving. You did this, he spat. I did what? I asked calmly. Leverage my property? That's what businessmen do, isn't it? He cursed, the sound muffled as he slammed something down. You're killing us. I smiled. No, Luke. You're just bleeding from wounds you inflicted yourself. Hours later, Grace called. The composure was gone. Her voice trembled between fury and fear. Eleanor, stop this. You'll destroy the family. I stared out the window at the valley, the trees whispering in the wind like witnesses. You already did, I said quietly. I'm just cleaning up the mess. You think people will forgive you? She hissed. You're turning Mercer against Mercer. I let the silence linger long enough for her to feel it. Maybe that's what it takes to build something honest for once. I hung up before she could respond. When I turned, Caleb was standing in the doorway, arms crossed. So that's it? You've got them cornered. For now, I said. But cornered animals are unpredictable. He studied me for a long moment. You're not the same woman who came back here, you know. I am, I said. I've just stopped apologizing for her. Outside, the sky was turning that pale, sharp gray that always came before snow. The wind carried the faint echo of saws from the mill, steady, relentless. They think I'm destroying them, I murmured, half to myself. But I'm only pruning the rot. Caleb tilted his head. And what grows after that? I looked out toward the horizon, where the mountains cut the clouds open like truth. Something that bears my name. By winter, the valley had turned white again. Snow thick on the ridges, frozen air carrying the echo of machines through the trees. Work at the mill went on despite the cold, the men wrapped in flannel and grit, steam rising from the saws like breath. Business was stable, profitable even. But peace is always the quiet before something breaks. Caleb was out supervising a new logging cut when it happened. I was in town, signing papers at the bank, when my phone buzzed with a text from one of the crew. You better get out here, now. By the time I reached the site, I could hear the shouting from the tree line. Luke's voice, raw, furious, carried over the hum of the equipment. You think you can hide behind her? He barked. You're on the wrong side, Reed. I crested the hill just in time to see him shove Caleb backward against a stack of felled logs. Two of Luke's hired men stood nearby, watching like spectators who'd paid for blood. Caleb wiped a smear of dirt from his mouth. "I told you once, I don't work for you." Luke sneered. "You think she's going to save you?" "My mother doesn't have a company. She has a grudge." Caleb straightened slowly, his breath steaming in the cold. "She's got more than you ever will." That was all it took. Luke swung first. Sloppy, emotional, too much pride behind the punch. Caleb blocked it, grabbed his jacket, and the two went down hard in the snow, fists flying. The men nearby took a hesitant step forward, unsure whether to stop it or cheer. I didn't think. I ran. "Stop!" My voice ripped through the air, sharp and hoarse. "Luke, stop it!" Neither of them listened. Luke drove a fist into Caleb's ribs. Caleb shoved him off and landed one of his own. When I reached them, I caught Luke's arm mid-swing. He froze, panting, sweat and snow dripping down his temple. "He's not your enemy," I said, my voice trembling with cold and fury. "I am." For a long moment, he just stared at me, chest heaving. Then he laughed. Low, disbelieving, unhinged. "Of course you are," he said. "You always have been. You were never a real Mercer." The words hit like a slap, but I didn't flinch. I stepped closer until our breath mingled in the frozen air. "Then you'll fall as one." His face twisted, a child's rage in a man's body. "You won't win, Mother. You can't. You've turned everyone against you. Grace, me, the company." I cut him off, my tone calm as glass. "I already won, Luke. You just don't know it yet." Something in him faltered then, a flicker of doubt behind the fury, but pride wouldn't let him show it. He wrenched free from my grip and staggered back. "You think rebuilding that mill makes you powerful? You're living off a corpse's bones." I stared at him, snow swirling between us. "Maybe. But I'm the one who gave it life again." Caleb, still catching his breath, stepped forward. "You need to go, Luke." Luke turned on him with pure venom. "She'll use you too, just like she used Dad, just like she used everyone." Caleb didn't move. "No," he said quietly. "She builds what you destroy." Luke's expression cracked, a flash of something like grief flickering beneath the anger. For a second I saw the boy he'd been, the one who'd followed Richard into every bad decision, desperate to be seen. Then it was gone. He turned without another word, signaled to his men, and climbed into the truck. Tires spun against the ice, kicking slush over Caleb's boots as they sped off down the hill. The clearing fell silent except for the low hum of the saws and the wind scraping through the branches. I stood there, the cold biting into my skin, heart pounding like it was trying to break through my chest. Caleb came to stand beside me, rubbing his bruised knuckles. "You all right?" "I'm fine," I said, though my voice shook. "He's the one who's not." He gave me a wary look. "He's angry enough to do something stupid." "He already has," I whispered. Snow began to fall again, soft flakes melting against the heat still burning in my palms. "Eleanor," Caleb said, low and steady. "This fight, whatever it is, it's not just business anymore." I looked toward the tree line where Luke's truck had vanished. It never was. He exhaled, the sound heavy. So what now? I watched the falling snow blur the tracks on the ground until the evidence of the fight was gone, wiped clean. "Now," I said softly, "we find out how far he's willing to fall." Grace Mercer had always been the kind of woman who could turn ruin into spectacle. Even now, as her empire cracked around her, she did it with pearls at her throat and lipstick sharp as war paint. But desperation has a scent, and by late winter, everyone in Bozeman could smell it. Word spread fast. Grace was liquidating what was left of the Mercer Trust. She'd arranged quiet meetings with out-of-state firms, the kind that didn't ask too many questions about clean accounting. The last of the family land, timber plots, grazing fields, even part of the old resort property, was being sold to a development conglomerate from Chicago. A final play to keep the illusion alive. Caleb brought me the news one morning, a thin folder under his arm. "She's selling everything that's still got the Mercer name on it," he said. "Except the parts she's already lost," I murmured. He dropped the folder on my desk. "There's more. They're using false valuations, padding contracts, faking reports to inflate the sale." Of course they were. Grace never believed in honesty, only optics. I stared at the folder, the numbers swimming like ghosts. If the trust sells to an out-of-state buyer under fraudulent terms, she'll walk away rich, Caleb finished. I met his eyes. Not if I bury her with her own paperwork. That night, the valley was silent but for the hum of my computer. I sat in the dark study, scanning each document, each forged signature. Decades of deceit condensed into data, line items, accounts, shell transfers. I compiled them all, stripped of names, and sent them to every major business reporter in the state. Anonymous. Surgical. The story broke 3 days later. Mercer Trust under investigation for fraudulent land deals. The fallout was immediate. Banks froze her accounts. Partners withdrew. The Chicago firm backed out, citing ethical concerns. Grace's face, still immaculate, filled the local news, lips tight as she pushed through reporters outside the courthouse. Caleb turned off the television mid-broadcast. "You really think they'll prosecute her?" "She's too old to go to jail," I said, "but she'll spend what's left of her life paying for her own defense." He gave a low whistle. "Remind me never to cross you." "I gave her 20 years of silence," I said quietly. "This is the interest." But even I didn't expect what came next. Maya called. Her voice was thin, stripped of its usual charm. "Eleanor," she said, "we need to talk." "We?" I echoed. "There's no we, Maya, not anymore." "It's not about Luke," she said quickly. "It's about survival." She was smart enough not to come to the house. We met at a cafe on the edge of town, neutral ground. She arrived dressed down, no diamonds, no designer coat. Just a woman who'd seen the storm coming and decided to get out before it hit. She sat across from me, hands trembling around a paper cup. "Grace is finished," she said. "The trust is gone. The investigators have already called me twice. I can't be implicated?" I asked. Her eyes flicked up, desperate. "I can help you. I have Luke's documents, stock records, transfer rights. I can sign them over. In exchange, I want immunity. And enough to start over somewhere far from here." I studied her for a long moment. The cafe buzzed around us. Ordinary people sipping coffee, unaware that the last of a dynasty was unraveling at their table. "Why are you really doing this?" I asked. Her voice cracked. "Because he's already gone, Eleanor. Luke's drinking again. He blames everyone but himself. Grace can't save him, and I won't drown with them." She slid the folder across the table. Inside were Luke's shares, documents granting controlling interest in what remained of the Mercer Trust. It was everything I needed to finish what I'd started. I signed the immunity paperwork and pushed it toward her. "You'll have your freedom," I said, "but don't mistake it for absolution." Tears welled in her eyes. "Thank you." I stood, slipping the folder into my bag. "Don't thank me. You just did the smartest thing you've ever done." I paused at the door, looking back at her. Shame you married the wrong Mercer. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, soft and relentless. I watched it coat the streetlights, muffling the sound of everything that once belonged to them. When I got back to Hollow Ridge, Caleb was waiting by the fire. "How'd it go?" "She signed it all over," I said, setting the folder down beside the flames. "Grace loses everything by morning." He nodded slowly, eyes flicking to the window. "And Luke?" I stared into the fire, watching the edges of the folder catch light. "Luke will do what Mercers do best," I said. "Destroy what's left." Outside, the wind rose, carrying the faint echo of sirens from town. The Empire had fallen, but the storm wasn't done yet. The night it happened, the valley was too still. No wind, no sound but the low hum of the generator and the creak of the old porch boards beneath my boots. Snow had stopped falling hours ago, leaving the sky unnervingly clear, stars sharp enough to cut through. Caleb had gone into town to close the final accounts. I stayed behind, sorting through the last of the paperwork, each document another small victory over ghosts. Grace's empire was finished. Maya was gone. Only Luke remained, a shadow refusing to fade. The call came just after midnight. No voice, just silence on the other end. Then breathing. Slow. Measured. "Luke," I said into the receiver. Nothing. Then the line went dead. The first whiff of smoke reached me minutes later. Subtle at first, like burnt pine carried on wind, then heavier. Real. I turned toward the window. The horizon glowed orange, flickering. For a moment, I thought it was the mill. Then I saw the reflection, flames crawling up the edge of the barn. I ran. The night split open with heat and roar. Fire moved faster than thought, licking through dry boards and old paint. The barn was fully engulfed by the time I reached the yard, sparks drifting upward like furious fireflies. "Caleb!" I shouted, though I knew he was miles away. The phone in my pocket buzzed uselessly as I grabbed the garden hose, yanking it toward the porch. The water sputtered, weak against the blaze. The flames were feeding on everything: wood, oil, memory. Then came the sound. A bottle breaking. Gasoline. I spun and saw him. Luke. He stood near the edge of the fence line, face lit by firelight, expression unrecognizable. Sweat and snow mixed on his brow, his breath clouding in the cold. "You ruined me!" he shouted over the crackling inferno. "Everything! You took everything!" I could barely hear him through the roar. "You did this!" I screamed back. "You think this will bring any of it back?" He stepped closer, wild-eyed. "Dad was right about you. You destroy everything you touch." The fire surged behind him, catching the house's eaves, spreading faster than I could move. "Luke, stop!" I shouted. "You'll kill us both!" He laughed, a sound I'll never forget. "Then we'll burn together." Before I could reach him, something heavy hit the back of my shoulder. Caleb tackling me to the ground. The air whooshed from my lungs as he dragged me back toward the truck. "Go!" he barked. "It's gone, Eleanor." But I couldn't. I stared at the house, the walls where Richard's initials were still carved into the beams, the windows I'd scrubbed clean with my own hands, my legacy, my revenge, my home. "Go!" Caleb shouted again, pulling me into motion. We stumbled into the truck, coughing through smoke, the fire's reflection turning the windshield to molten gold. As we tore down the driveway, I could see the flames reaching higher, devouring the roof, collapsing the porch. By the time the fire department arrived, there was nothing left to save. The firefighters worked in a blur of shouting and water, their faces grim. Caleb held me back as I tried to move closer, my clothes streaked with ash. The structure groaned once, then caved in on itself with a sound like thunder. When the flames finally began to die, I pulled free from Caleb's grip and walked toward what remained. Smoke curled through the blackened air, embers falling around me like snow. "Eleanor!" he called. "Don't—" But I kept walking. My boots crunched over the soaked ash, heat still bleeding from the earth. I knelt where the study used to be, where I'd once planned every step of my rise. Beneath the melted frame of my desk, something glinted faintly through the soot. The deed. The original, sealed in its tin case, the one Richard had hidden years ago. Somehow untouched, miraculously intact. I picked it up, the metal still warm. When I stood, firefighters were dragging a figure from the edge of the property. Luke. His jacket was scorched, face streaked with soot, eyes burning brighter than the fire behind him. "You ruined me!" he spat again, thrashing against their grip. "You think you're better than him? You're worse. You're him." I stepped closer, holding the deed against my chest. "No, Luke," I said softly. "I finished what your father started." His expression faltered, confusion breaking through madness. Then they pulled him away, cuffs glinting in the firelight. I turned back to the ruins, to the smoke curling into the stars. The firefighters doused the final embers, the hiss, loud and final. Steam rose like ghosts leaving the earth. Caleb came to stand beside me, his face drawn, eyes reflecting the glow of what once was. "You've got nothing left," he said quietly. I looked at the deed in my hands, the last unburned thing. "No," I said. "I have everything that matters." He stared at me for a long moment. "Eleanor, was it worth it?" The wind caught the last of the smoke, carrying it into the dark. I watched it go. "Ask me when it stops burning," I whispered. Behind us, the house that had built and buried the Mercers collapsed into itself, wood, ash, and legacy folding into silence. The empire was purified by flame, and this time it was truly mine. Spring came slow that year. Snowmelt ran down the mountain in silver threads, cutting through blackened earth where the fire had scorched everything clean. Hollow Ridge was a skeleton, charred beams, ash-packed soil, but beneath it, new green had already begun to push through. It took months to clear what was left. The insurance money barely covered the cost, but I didn't care. Every splinter, every nail pulled from the wreckage felt like exorcism. Caleb called in crews from town, men who'd worked the mill, grateful for steady pay again. They didn't ask questions. They knew better than to mention Luke or Grace or what had burned. By June, the new frame stood where the old bones had fallen. The lines were cleaner now, simpler. No gilded edges, no Mercer flourishes, just wood and glass and light. It wasn't a mansion anymore. It was something else. Something mine. The morning they hung the new sign, the air smelled like sawdust and fresh paint. E. Mercer Holdings, black letters against steel. No pretense, no apology. I stood by the porch as the men bolted it into place. The sun caught on the metal, and for a moment I could see my reflection in it. Older, yes, but clearer. Caleb came up behind me, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Looks good," he said. "It's honest," I said. He studied the sign for a moment, then turned to me. "You've done what none of them could," he said softly. "You made it honest." I didn't answer right away. The mountains rose in the distance, snow still clinging to their peaks. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about what I'd lost or who I'd beaten. I was thinking about what would stay standing after I was gone. Caleb followed my gaze. You ever think about leaving this place behind? I smiled faintly. Every day. And yet you're still here. Because leaving isn't the same as healing, I said. He nodded, quiet. We stood there for a while, listening to the wind move through the pines. Somewhere below, the mill started its morning rhythm, saws humming, engines growling. The sound was steady, alive. Later that afternoon, I walked through the new house alone. The air inside still smelled of resin and varnish. The floors were warm underfoot, the walls unadorned. I ran my hand along a smooth beam and felt the faint burn mark where one of the workers had branded the company initials, EMH. My initials, my mark. On the rebuilt mantel sat the tin deed box, cleaned but still dented from the fire. I left it there, a reminder, not a trophy. Mail came less often now. Most of it was business, contracts, invoices, permits. But that day, one envelope stood out. No return address. Just my name, written in a hand I recognized instantly. Maya. For a long while, I didn't open it. The paper was heavy, expensive, her kind of stationery. I turned it over in my hands, tracing the seal. Finally, curiosity won. The note inside was short, her handwriting elegant and unsteady. Eleanor, I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know. You ended it. The curse, the lies, all of it. You were the only one who could. M. I stared at the words until they blurred. The curse. That was what people called it now. Like everything that had happened was myth instead of consequence. I carried the letter outside. The evening air was cool, tinged with the scent of rain. I crouched beside the fire pit, struck a match, and held the paper to the flame. It caught quickly, curling black at the edges before folding into ash. Some things deserved to burn twice. When it was gone, I brushed the ashes into the dirt and stood. Caleb was watching from the porch, his expression unreadable. You could have kept it, he said. I shook my head. Some stories don't need forgiveness. He nodded once, slow. You think it's over now? I looked out across the valley, the mountains turning gold under the setting sun. The rebuilt house behind me stood quiet and strong, no ghosts in its walls this time. It's over, I said. But peace doesn't mean forgetting. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of pine and sawdust and something cleaner, like the earth exhaling after a long burn. I turned toward the horizon, the sign gleaming in the fading light. E. Mercer Holdings. My name. My making. My ending. And for the first time in years, the silence felt earned. By the next spring, the valley had forgotten how to look wounded. Grass had grown over the last traces of ash, and the air smelled of sap and thawing soil. From the porch, I could see the mill road winding like a scar that had finally started to fade. The house, my house, stood complete. Pale wood, tall windows, light pouring through every angle. Where fire had once eaten through the beams, sunlight now spilled like blessing. That morning, the kitchen buzzed with noise for the first time in years. The long tables were lined with simple white cloth, dishes carried in from every household in town. Caleb moved among the workers, laughing as he strung lanterns between the porch posts. It wasn't a gala or a charity dinner. It was a thank you. By dusk, the place hummed with warmth. The locals arrived in their best boots and Sunday coats, faces lit by the golden hour. They filled the rebuilt hall with the kind of laughter that shakes dust out of memory. Someone brought a fiddle. Someone else. A jug of something stronger. It was the first time I'd opened the doors to anyone since the fire. Feels strange, Caleb said, setting down a tray of glasses beside me. All these people in the house again. It's not strange, I said, looking at the glow of lamplight against the walls. It's right. When everyone had settled, the foreman, Bill Travers, gray beard, kind eyes, raised a glass. To the woman who rebuilt Hollow Ridge, he said, his voice carrying over the hum. Not just the house, but the work, the pride, the name. Applause filled the room. It wasn't the polite clatter of investors or family dinners. It was real, rough around the edges, and alive. I lifted my glass but didn't drink. My eyes moved to the window instead, where the reflection of the crowd shimmered against the darkening mountains. For a moment I thought I saw him there. Richard, half smiling, that same air of possession he always carried. But when I blinked, it was only my own reflection staring back. Older, sharper, unafraid. Caleb leaned close. What's running through that head of yours? Nothing I'd take back, I said. He studied me, the lines around his eyes softened by the firelight. You ever think he'd have believed this? Richard didn't believe in me, I said quietly. He believed in ownership. There's a difference. Outside, the wind stirred through the pines, low, almost like approval. Later, when the food was gone and the laughter had mellowed into conversation, I stepped outside for air. The sky was a deep blue dome, stars crowding at the edges. Lanterns swung gently from the porch beams, their light spilling over the gravel path. Caleb followed, 2 glasses in hand. He handed me one. To new empires, he said. I smiled faintly. No empires, just foundations that don't burn. He nodded, his gaze sweeping over the hills. You did it, you know. You built something good. Real. Maybe even peaceful. Peaceful, I echoed. I almost don't know what to do with that word. He hesitated, then asked softly, Happy? The question hung there between us, simple and impossible. I turned toward the valley, the moon rising over the ridge, light silvering the land that had once been all ruin and smoke. Happiness, I said, is too small a word. He smiled, understanding. Behind us, music drifted from the open doors, someone strumming an old tune about rivers and roads. I let it wash over me, felt the weight of years loosen in my chest. The ghosts were gone now. Even the land seemed to know. I took a slow breath, the scent of pine and earth filling my lungs. The house stood solid behind me, the sign gleaming faintly in the starlight. E. Mercer Holdings. All that remained of the Mercers was this place, and the woman who refused to stay buried with them. I turned to Caleb, to the hills, to the horizon that had watched it all burn and rise again. He left me a broken house in Montana, I said quietly, but inside its ruin, I built my revenge. The wind carried the words into the dark, across the valley, over the mountains that once belonged to Richard Mercer, and now to me.